A $14 meal quietly turns into $42, not because of inflation, not because of luxury, not even because of bad decision making. It happens because of something far more subtle: convenience. A simple dinner, just a few blocks away, gets ordered through an app. The price looks slightly higher, but not enough to matter in the moment. A small add-on gets suggested, and it feels harmless. Then come the fees: delivery, service, small order, taxes, and a tip that feels socially required. Suddenly, that $14 meal has tripled in cost. And here's the part that makes this interesting. The person making that decision isn't careless, not irresponsible, not financially illiterate, just tired. That's the real trigger, because the modern economy has quietly built an entire system around that exact moment. The moment when energy is low, attention is limited, and the easiest option wins. This is what's known as the convenience premium. At its core, the convenience premium is simple. It's the extra amount paid to make life easier. Faster delivery, less effort, fewer decisions, less thinking. It shows up everywhere. Food delivery, grocery apps, pre-cut vegetables, one-click shopping, subscription services, even things like pre-assembled furniture. And on the surface, it feels reasonable. Pay a little more, save some time, reduce stress. That sounds like a fair trade. But that's only half the story. Because research coming out of places like UCLA and the Becker-Friedman Institute shows something deeper. People don't just pay for convenience because it saves time. They pay because it removes friction. It removes the small bits of effort that feel disproportionately large in the moment. Walking 10 minutes feels annoying. Cooking feels tiring. Comparing prices feels like work. And the brain is wired to avoid that kind of immediate discomfort, even when the financial trade-off is objectively terrible. Behavioral economists call this present bias. It means immediate effort feels heavier than future cost. So the brain treats a short walk as a big problem while treating an extra $20 as something abstract and forgettable. That's why a decision that looks irrational on paper feels completely reasonable in real life. And companies know this. Entire business models are built around reducing friction just enough to make spending feel effortless. Every extra click removed, every default option added, every recommended item shown at checkout is designed to make the easy choice also the expensive one. This is not accidental. It's engineered, and the result is something that looks small in isolation but becomes massive over time. Take food delivery as an example. The average order often ends up 40 to 60% more expensive than picking it up. That difference comes from menu markups, platform fees, delivery charges, and tips. Individually, each cost feels manageable. Together, they quietly stack. 2 orders per week with an extra $13 each time doesn't feel like much. But over a year, that's $1,352 gone. Not on food, on convenience. And that's just one category. Now add grocery delivery. Prices are typically 25 to 30% higher than in-store. Once fees and tips are included, a household spending $600 per month on groceries could easily be paying an extra $150 monthly just to avoid going to the store. That's another $1,800 per year. Then there are the less obvious ones. Pre-cut fruits and vegetables that cost 2 to 4 times more than whole produce. Coffee pods that cost 4 times more per cup than traditional brewing. Single-serve packaging that doubles the price of everyday snacks. Subscription services that quietly increase spending by removing the friction of checkout. Each one feels minor, but they all follow the same pattern. Pay more to do less. And the real cost isn't just the price difference. It's the repetition. Because convenience isn't a one-time decision. It's a habit. And once it becomes normal, it stops feeling like a trade-off. The first time food is delivered, it feels like a treat. The 10th time, it feels like a shortcut. By the 50th time, it feels like the default. This is where another concept comes in, something behavioral scientists call hedonic adaptation. It means people quickly adjust to new levels of comfort, and what once felt like a luxury becomes an expectation. So instead of convenience being used occasionally, it becomes embedded in daily life, and that's where the math starts to get uncomfortable. Imagine an average convenience premium of $400 per month across different categories. That includes delivery fees, subscriptions, markups, and all the small ways friction gets removed. That's $4,800 per year. Now, stretch that over time. Invested at a modest 8% annual return, that amount grows to roughly $768,000 over 35 years, not from one big decision, from hundreds of small ones. This is where the idea of a dumb tax starts to make sense. Because most of these purchases don't actually create value. They don't increase income. They don't improve long-term well-being in a meaningful way. They simply replace one type of time with another. Time that could have been spent picking up food gets replaced with time spent scrolling on a phone. Time that could have been used grocery shopping gets replaced with time spent watching something. The total amount of free time doesn't change, only how it's spent. And this is where one of the biggest misconceptions comes in. The idea that time saved automatically equals value gained. It sounds logical. If an hour is worth $50, then paying $20 to save that hour seems like a good deal. But in reality, that only works if that saved hour is actually used to generate $50. And for most people, it isn't. Salaried workers earn the same regardless of how they spend their evening. Hourly workers can't always add extra hours on demand, and even for those who can, the saved time rarely gets converted into productive work. Instead, it gets absorbed into leisure. So the trade isn't money for income, it's money for slightly different downtime. And that's a very different equation. This is where convenience shifts from being neutral to being expensive, because instead of amplifying value, it just replaces effort. And when that replacement happens repeatedly, it starts behaving like a leak. Not a dramatic one, a slow, consistent one. The kind that's easy to ignore but impossible to outrun. But here's where things get more nuanced. Not all convenience is bad. In fact, some of it is incredibly powerful. There are situations where paying for convenience doesn't drain wealth but actually creates it. And the difference between those two outcomes comes down to one question. What happens to the time that gets freed up? If that time disappears into low-value activities, the convenience becomes a cost. But if that time gets redirected into something that increases income, improves health, or builds long-term capacity, then that same convenience becomes leverage. And that distinction changes everything. Because now the goal isn't to eliminate convenience, it's to use it correctly. And that requires a different way of thinking about it. Not as comfort, not as a reward, but as an investment. This is where academic ideas around convenience yield become useful in a practical sense. In finance, a convenience yield refers to the benefit gained from holding or accessing something easily. It's not just about ownership. It's about immediate usability. Applied to everyday life, the same idea holds. Convenience has a yield, but only if it produces something in return. If it frees up time that leads to higher earnings, better decisions, or improved well-being, then the premium is justified. If it doesn't, then it's just a cost disguised as comfort, and most people never make that distinction. Because the decision rarely feels analytical, it feels emotional. It happens at the end of a long day, or in a moment of fatigue, or when something slightly inconvenient feels overwhelming. And in those moments, the easiest option wins, not because it's the best choice, but because it requires the least resistance. That's the real mechanism behind the convenience economy. Not laziness, not even preference, just the consistent removal of friction in exchange for money. And once that pattern is recognized, a different question starts to emerge. Not whether convenience is good or bad, but when it actually makes sense. Because there are situations where paying for convenience doesn't just save time, it changes outcomes. And those situations are where convenience stops being a dumb tax and starts becoming smart leverage. The real turning point comes from understanding that convenience itself isn't the problem. The problem is how it gets used. Because the same mechanism that quietly drains thousands of dollars over time can, in the right context, become one of the most powerful tools for increasing income, improving health, and expanding capacity. The difference is subtle, but it's everything. It comes down to whether convenience is replacing something low value or unlocking something high value. Most people use convenience to escape effort. A smaller group uses it to amplify output, and those two paths lead to completely different financial outcomes over time. Think about the difference between ordering food every night and paying for childcare. On the surface, both are convenience purchases. Both reduce effort. Both save time. But what happens after that time is saved is what separates them. In one case, the saved time disappears into passive consumption, scrolling, watching, resting in a way that doesn't compound. In the other, that time can be redirected into work that generates income, into focused effort that increases earning potential, or even into rest that genuinely restores energy and improves performance the next day. That's the key distinction that research around convenience and productivity keeps pointing toward. Convenience only becomes economically rational when the time it creates is actually used in a way that produces value. This is where the idea of buying back time often gets misunderstood. It sounds productive, it sounds efficient, but in practice, most time that gets bought back isn't invested. It's absorbed. It disappears into the same low-impact activities that would have happened anyway, just in a slightly more comfortable form. That's why so many people feel like they're saving time but not getting ahead. Because the time isn't being converted into anything measurable. It's not increasing income. It's not building skills. It's not even consistently improving health. It's just shifting how evenings and weekends are experienced. And that's not leverage. That's substitution. But now shift the scenario slightly. Imagine a situation where someone is earning $30 per hour, but has the opportunity to earn $80 per hour doing specialized work, freelance projects, or career-building tasks. The constraint isn't ability. It's time and energy. In that case, paying $20 for a service that frees up an hour doesn't just remove effort. It creates a gap that can be filled with higher-value work. Now the equation changes completely. That $20 expense isn't replacing time. It's transforming it. It's converting low-value time into high-value output. And that's exactly what economists mean, conceptually, when they talk about rational convenience decisions. The cost only makes sense when the return exceeds it, either directly through income or indirectly through improved performance and energy. The same logic applies to tools. A piece of software that automates repetitive tasks, an AI tool that speeds up research or writing, or even something as simple as a better workflow system can look like an unnecessary expense on the surface. But if it increases output by 2 or 3 times, or reduces hours of friction every week, it's no longer a cost. It becomes an amplifier. And this is where the conversation shifts from spending to investing, because the goal isn't to minimize every expense. The goal is to maximize the return on time and energy, and sometimes that means spending strategically to remove the right kind of friction. Health is another area where this distinction becomes obvious. Paying for convenience that improves nutrition, consistency, or recovery can have compounding effects that go far beyond the initial cost. A meal prep service that ensures consistent, balanced meals might cost more than cooking everything manually. But if it prevents poor eating habits, reduces decision fatigue, and maintains energy levels throughout the week, the downstream benefits can be significant. More energy leads to better focus. Better focus leads to higher quality work. Higher quality work often leads to higher income over time. In that case, convenience isn't just saving time. It's stabilizing performance. And that has real economic value, even if it's not immediately visible. Contrast that with something like daily food delivery driven purely by convenience. The outcome is completely different. There's no improvement in energy, no increase in productivity, no meaningful return, just a higher cost for the same result. And that's where the dumb tax shows up most clearly. It's not about the purchase itself, it's about the absence of a return. Money leaves but nothing meaningful comes back. This is why the distinction between good and bad convenience can't be based on the category alone. It's not that food delivery is always bad or that paid services are always good. It's about context and outcome. A delivery order during a genuinely overwhelming day, when it prevents burnout or allows recovery, might be completely justified. But the same order repeated out of habit, replacing a simple alternative that requires minimal effort, starts to become a pattern. And patterns are where the real cost accumulates. Over time, these patterns form a kind of invisible baseline, What once felt optional starts to feel necessary. What once felt like a treat becomes routine. And this is where the long-term math becomes unavoidable. Small, repeated convenience decisions stack in a way that's almost impossible to notice day to day, but becomes undeniable over years. A few extra dollars here, a slightly higher cost there, a subscription that goes unchecked, a habit that forms quietly in the background. None of it feels significant in isolation, but together they create a steady outflow that compounds in the wrong direction, and that brings everything back to a single practical filter, a way to decide in real time whether a convenience purchase is actually worth it, not based on emotion, not based on habit, but based on outcome. The question isn't whether something saves time. Almost all convenience does that. The real question is what that saved time turns into. Does it become income, improved health, better focus, or meaningful progress? Or does it simply disappear into comfort that leaves everything else unchanged? If the answer is that nothing changes, then the convenience is functioning as a cost. A quiet, recurring cost that feels justified in the moment but doesn't hold up over time. But if the answer is that something improves, something grows, something compounds, then that same convenience becomes leverage. And leverage is what builds momentum. It's what turns time into something more than just time. So the rule becomes surprisingly simple, even if applying it consistently isn't. Convenience is worth paying for when it multiplies income, energy, or long-term capacity more than it costs. If it doesn't do that, it's probably just removing friction without creating value. And removing friction alone, while it feels good, rarely leads anywhere meaningful. Once that filter is in place, decisions start to look different. The focus shifts from avoiding effort to evaluating outcomes. From asking, "Is this easier?" to asking, "What does this actually produce?" And that shift, small as it seems, changes the trajectory of how money and time interact over years and decades. Because at the end of the day, every convenience purchase is a trade. Not just of money for time, but of potential for comfort. And those trades, repeated consistently, shape the kind of life that gets built. One path leads to more ease in the moment, but less flexibility in the future. The other requires a bit more effort up front, but creates more options, more capacity, and more control over time. And the difference between those two paths isn't discipline or intelligence. It's awareness. The ability to see the trade clearly, to recognize when convenience is quietly extracting value, and to choose deliberately when it's actually worth it. That's how convenience stops being something that drains wealth and starts becoming something that builds it. If this changed the way convenience gets viewed, take a second to like the video and subscribe for more breakdowns like this.